Thank you everyone for joining us today for our next webinar. Tim will tell us about the Zeek Telemetry framework. He has been with the Zeek project for a while nowadays and has been a merge master since 2019 and worked on just about all parts of the system, and he has been spending quite a bit of time on that. And so with that, take it away. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tim Wojtulewicz. As Johanna mentioned, I've been working on Zeek since 2019, mid-2019. Kind of had my fingers in a lot of things. I've kind of stepped back and working on large features recently. One of those is the Zeek Telemetry framework that we released in Zeek 7.0. A little history of telemetry in Zeek. We added it in, the original version of it was added in 2021. It involved a hand-implemented Prometheus hook in CAF, which is, if you don't know what CAF is, it's kind of the underlying framework we use for interprocess communication in Broker. It's chained into Zeek via Broker. Originally, we had it where every node aggregated all the metrics, collected all the metrics, sent them over events to the manager node, and the manager node presented one endpoint for Prometheus to connect to and read data from. We realized after a bit that was kind of a bad idea, and that we sent an awful lot of event traffic that was just telemetry data. So we switched it back to not being aggregated, and you had to then add each individual node to your Prometheus configuration to get telemetry data. We're in Zeek 7.0. We decided to and kind of before that, move on from Broker's implementation of telemetry. If you know what Broker is, it's a lot of things. It's and Arne Welsel talked about this in his talk a couple of weeks ago on the cluster framework stuff. Broker is an IPC mechanism and is data stores and is telemetry and is a lot of things that it kind of doesn't need to do. Broker in general is pretty hard for the team at large to maintain. We have one person, Dominic, who kind of is the core maintainer for Broker. The rest of us have tried to look at it, and it turns into sort of a black box in a lot of places. As for telemetry itself, it doesn't really make sense to be a part of Broker. If Broker is intended to be an IPC mechanism, why are we providing telemetry data out of Broker too? There are better community-supported libraries that exist. We don't need to hand-write Prometheus support ourselves. We can just use one of those libraries, and then Broker can just hook in. We can just reverse it, and Broker can hook into Zeek's connection to Prometheus instead of Zeek hooking into Broker's connection to Prometheus. This gains us a bunch of benefits, and I'll talk about those in a bit. Using an external library, this is where it got really, really hairy. We originally started working with OpenTelemetry's C++ library. They call it OTelCpp. It is a giant thing. It supports both metrics and tracing and a bunch of other stuff that we really didn't need. It supports asynchronous instruments, which means you can set up an instrument, a telemetry instrument, and say, hey, when you collect data from this, that's when I'm going to populate the data, instead of continually populating the data, waiting for, spinning your wheel, basically repopulating the data when it doesn't need to be updated yet. Unfortunately, your API is really complicated, and it's really difficult to build. And you get really into the weeds of how to use OpenTelemetry really fast. And we spent a couple of months trying to make it all work. And then we realized that, in all honesty, it's really just another library called Prometheus-CPP underneath. They have a bunch of wrappers over the top of Prometheus-CPP that make it work with their API. But if we're just using another library underneath, why don't we just use that library directly? So that's when we made the switch over to Prometheus CVP. The API is way easier to work with. They only provide just the things for Prometheus. There's no async API in there, which is good and bad. We opened a pull request against them or for them to add it, and they decided not to take it. We worked around it and ended up just adding one ourselves that we use inside of Zeek. So all of this about Prometheus is we're moving all of telemetry basically to a Prometheus-first configuration. The way that Prometheus generally works in large kind of cluster or multi-system setups is each node provides their own data. There's no aggregation. That means in Zeek terms, the manager, the proxies, the loggers, the workers, they all provide their own data to Prometheus. They all have their own in each individual endpoint. All of the data coming out of our Prometheus, we have validated against PromTool, which is the Prometheus project provides a tool basically to they will read the data coming out of your system, do some linting on it, provide you some suggestions on things that you can improve. So we have done that. So all of our data, minus one thing that is not a big deal, we're ignoring that one, about the way that we list some thread data. It's not important. Cluster configuration in Zeek, we have added to where you can now list a metrics port in your cluster configuration that basically tells your nodes this is the port, the individual port that each node is going to work on, very similar to how we list the port for broker. There is a node or there's a endpoint provided on the manager node alone called services.json. And I'll show an example of that in just a minute. That basically says, here are all the nodes in my cluster. Here are all the ports that they're listening on. Here are the IP addresses. Caveat here in all of this is that it now requires that your external Prometheus instance can talk to all of your nodes. This might be a little different than before, where you only had to talk to the manager. Now all of your workers and loggers and everything need to be exposed in some way to Prometheus. I'm sorry, you're going to have to go talk to your network operations people. They'll get over it. Here's an example of the cluster configuration. As you can see, we now have this metrics port field in each node, similar to the port that we were listening to for broker. This can actually be auto-populated by the management framework, thanks to DOP, who has been doing a bunch of work on that. I think we just merged a PR last week, that makes this all be auto-populated by the management framework. This is from that cluster configuration. You see, these are all listening on localhost. This is just a thing I generated from a test cluster on my system. These are all listening on localhost on individual ports. The services.json, if you were to go to the manager's port number /services.json, this is what you get out of it. What this does is you basically tell Prometheus, look at that services.json endpoint, and Prometheus will automatically configure itself to talk to all of these targets. You don't have to go into Prometheus to hand configure each individual endpoint. Services.json provides that for you, and Prometheus knows how to load this and auto-configure itself to talk to each individual node. The new telemetry API, not a whole lot has changed. It's really pretty close to the existing API. The big things are there's only double versions of instruments now. There are no longer count versions also. This is fine. Most of the data that was being loaded into Prometheus was well within the space, well within the range values of doubles anyways. That's a limitation of the Prometheus UB library. They only provide double instruments, and working around that wasn't really worth the effort. Broker options and environment variables for telemetry were all moved into a new telemetry namespace. That means all like the broker underscore names, environment variables and all that are now just telemetry underscore. The unit field was removed from telemetry.log. We found that most of the time the unit field wasn't useful for anything. And then the is some argument was removed when creating new instruments. The is some argument was always sort of weird because the only telemetry instrument that is actually a sum is a counter. Everything else, a gauge and a histogram, aren't sums ever. So when we were looking at the existing API, it didn't make sense to ever turn that to true for those instruments, and you would ever turn it to false for counters. So at that point, if you're never setting it to anything, it doesn't need to exist. See the 7.0 release notes for more detailed information on what's changed. It spells out each individual one of these bullets in greater detail, the specific options and things that were changed. By default, telemetry is disabled. We're still collecting all the data, but you can't connect to Prometheus to actually see it unless you redef the metrics port environment variable or scriptland variable. You just have to set that to a port. The default Prometheus port, I think, is 9911/TCP. So, and I'll give a demo in a minute, and you can see how I do that. Bonus here, if you've ever used prof.log, it collects a huge amount of statistics across all of the things that Zeek are doing, thread stats, and things about number of packets that are received and that kind of stuff. All of that stuff is now available in telemetry, in the telemetry framework also. So if you've been using Prometheus, you don't need to use prof.log anymore, or most of the things you don't need to use prof.log for anymore. There are some quote unquote expensive logs, such as looking up individual data about some of the threads, stuff like that, and some of the common stuff that Prometheus already provides, memory and CPU usage. All of that stuff is moved over, and there are now instruments for all of that. Another bonus, if you are using SNet's Zeek exporter plugin, which provides a whole nother set of metrics, they previously used an internal Prometheus CPP endpoint. They were using Prometheus CPP before we were. I don't know why we didn't just figure that out before. They have merged over to just use Zeek's internal telemetry now. They just basically grab our endpoint, push their metrics into that endpoint, and it all works as you'd expect. To me today and tagged a new version 0.7.0. Should be on the packages site this evening, tomorrow morning. I'm not actually sure when that updates. That includes all of their data now, so you can go ahead and use that. He wasn't sure how many people are actually using that plugin. It'd be cool to hear if people are actually using it and if they can improve it at all. A quick demo. This is real short. I just have a terminal here. I'm gonna just run Zeek. This is a build off of today's master. I am loading a trace file that we use for some of our testing. Here you can see at the end, I have redefined the metrics port to be 9911. Starts up and runs in the background. In this other tab, if I curl the metrics endpoint, you see all of the metrics that are being output. Some of the really fun ones are, here's all of the times we've written to a log stream.
I think your display output is hanging. I think the output of your.
Uh-oh, let me stop sharing and reshare this. Is that better?
That looks great.
Okay. Here are all of the times where an event was called. So you see, we have an awful lot of connections in this event. This was after, or actually, a lot of connections in this PCAP. This was after running for 5 seconds. There's some other ones down here. The number of timers that are pending. This is very useful for us debugging. We're trying to figure out why some timer didn't get triggered for some reason. So you can see the wealth of data that Zeek provides as part of the telemetry endpoint. Here you can see the broker endpoints or the broker telemetry that we have hooked back into Zeek, so they can provide to us data. And switch back to my slides. And that's actually all I have. It's really not a huge task to get yourself set up into the Prometheus telemetry. If you have any questions, can answer things as we go.
You can either write questions into the Q&A box or raise your hand and we can unmute you, or you can write them into chat. I'm just going to give it another minute to see if someone comes up with one.
Okay.
Okay, I guess you were super thorough and everyone is happy with that. In that case, thank you very, very much for the talk. I enjoyed it a lot. To make people aware, we have another webinar planned, but this time it's a little bit away. Currently, the next webinar that we have planned is on the 19th of March, and the topic is integrating ML analysis with Zeek, and the speaker is Duban. So I hope that we'll see all of you there, and thank you very much for attending.
Thanks, everybody.
Oh, actually, we have a question in Q&A now. And I just saw it. The question is, apologies if you answered already. Has the metrics framework helped find any bugs?
None that I can think directly that we've found bugs with. I know that we have used it to track down bugs. Specifically, we were fighting a bug with, let me see if I can remember this one. We were fighting a bug with wind conditions not triggering. And we were tracking that basically via one of the metrics going up, basically without triggering. We also have an incoming feature in 7.2. I don't think it landed in 7.1. Christian can correct me on this. That the broker framework will now track back pressure. So basically, if a worker starts getting backed up, we can detect that a worker is getting backed up and either stop that worker and restart it, or we can kind of move things around so that the worker will catch up. We don't have enough metrics right now. There are some configurable variables basically to tell you how many messages that a worker can be queuing before it is considered locked up. We don't have enough metrics in there to say to be able to track whether or not a worker is backed up. And so we're looking right now at adding some extra telemetry into there to track that, so that it basically makes Zeek more tunable, because you have more metrics about what is happening inside of Zeek. Does that answer your question?
Chandan is saying yes, yes, you did. Thank you, Tim. Good stuff. All right, last chance for any other questions. Right, there is none. Okay. Yeah. All right. Cool. Thank you, everyone. I think that's all we had. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.